Thank you, Raj, for that kind introduction. Governor Scott Walker, Raj, Michael, Madison, thank you for this opportunity to share our mission and vision. If we are going to make America great again, we must make America accountable again. And that accountability is going to start with you and I where we live. And so I am super happy to be right here in the state of California with this major historic announcement. It's been a 10-year knockdown, drag-out, decades-long dogfight to open the line-by-line spending in the state of California. Our auditors at openthebooks.com, we started 10 years ago. We filed the Freedom of Information Act request under the California Public Records Law, a sunshine request for the line-by-line spending in the Golden State. And it was John Chang, the Comptroller of California, and he rejected the request. And we filed that request with the next Comptroller in California, Betty Yee, and she rejected the request. So we got serious in 2020 in January. We filed a lawsuit in the Sacramento Superior Court, and they argued that it was an undue burden, even though they paid 50 million bills last year. And if you can pay the bill, you can track the bill. They argued it was an undue burden on their office to produce even a single transaction, and the judge bought it. We got nothing, zip, on our lawsuit to open the books in the state of California. It was our first transparency loss in court ever. So we pivoted to Plan B. We filed 4 months ago 442 sunshine requests on every single California state agency. And we compiled the state of California line-by-line spending like a jigsaw puzzle. So now you can come to openthebooks.com. There are 6.2 million records online from 201,684 state vendors, and they received just last year, in fiscal year 2021, $87 billion. We did what the governor, the comptroller, the attorney general who backed the comptroller in court, we did what the bureaucrats, the state lawmakers, and the state judge refused to do. We posted online the line-by-line spending in the state of California. So what possibly can be hidden in $87 billion of spending that they don't want you to see? Well, here's the first project we did. We took the governor's campaign donor disclosures, we matched it up with the state of California vendor list, and here's what we found. Governor Newsom engaged in the highly unethical practice of soliciting state vendors for campaign cash. He solicited up to 1,000 state vendors for $10.6 million worth of campaign donations, and those 1,000 vendors just last year received $6.2 billion in state payments. Just over the last couple of weeks in the state of California, they told you on a governor's emergency order to set your thermostats at 78 degrees. They told you not to charge your electric vehicle. And if you want reform in the California energy industry, good luck. We found 5 major utility players with state contracts gave Governor Newsom over $400,000 worth of campaign donation, and just last year, those 5 entrenched utilities received $430 million. You want better health care and pricing in the state of California? Good luck. We found the 7 major entrenched players with state contracts. I'm talking the 2 blues. United Healthcare, 7 companies, gave $700,000 to Governor Newsom's campaign fund, and just last year they received $1.9 billion in state payments. Think about this. Governor Newsom has pioneered the public financing of his campaign. As of August 1st of this year, he had $24 million of cash on hand in his campaign account. That's over 40% that was raised from state vendors at $10.6 million. So if you are out there on the live stream watching this and you're in the states of South Dakota or Florida or Texas and Governor Newsom's running campaign ads attacking your governor, just keep in mind that in part, California state taxpayers have a big stake in Governor Newsom's campaign fund. He has taken the largest corporations with state contracts, and they are recycling a piece of their profits back into his campaign fund. Now, in other states, this would be known as pay to play. But in California, it's the Wild West of a lack of a pay to play prohibition. Now look, I'm from Illinois. It is the Super Bowl of corruption. Our governors have a terrible reputation when it comes to corruption. At one recent point, we had 4 out of the last 9 governors served time in the federal penitentiary. 2013 was a particularly bad year. We had 2 governors in the federal pen at the same time, one from each party. It was Democrat Rod Blagojevich and Republican George Ryan. The state legislature got fed up and passed a pay-to-play law. And it simply says that if you're a state contractor and your contract is worth more than $50,000 a year, you can't give in the governor's race. That simple reform cleans up the pay-to-play culture in California politics. All right, so we've got a lot of work to do at all levels across the country. I want to communicate to you today that it is morning in America. Now, you have heard Ronald Reagan say that, and he ran the historic ad, one of the best political pieces of advertising for his re-election campaign in 1984. And we've all been to the ranch. We saw all the technology that was in place at the ranch. Reagan, as a principal partner in the fight to bring down the Soviet Union and communism as we knew it in his century, you in your pocket have more technology than what Reagan had at the ranch, even being guarded by the Secret Service. This is our moment. We've got the most education, the most prosperous, we're the most generous, we're the greatest nation in the history of the world. This is our American moment. And we have an ace card. We have a card that we know this to be true. It comes from the Bible, from Ephesians. This is not a fight of flesh and blood. This is a fight of principalities, good versus evil. And good, in the end, wins. We know we're going to win. We have to be a witness to history. We have to recognize that this is the American moment, that this is morning in America. Over the course of the last 5,000 years of human history, you and I have been given the greatest gift. And it's a recognition that our rights, they don't come from government, they come from God. And our founders recognized, and they instituted a government to secure our rights. And they knew the people needed the tools to hold that government accountable. And they recognized that knowledge is power, and they wrote transparency into our founding documents. So it's Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution. And it says that a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. Now, it's the internet age. It's the age of big data. There is a clear interpretation. Post every dime online in real time. Open the books. And that's our mission at openthebooks.com. Last year, we filed 50,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. It was the most in American history. We successfully captured $12 trillion worth of federal, state, and local expenditures. That's virtually, not quite, but virtually every dime taxed and spent at every level of government across the entire country. And we do this hard work so you can follow the money, so you can hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions. Here's what our database is comprised of. Now we've got all 50 states with their line-by-line spending. We've got the federal checkbook all the way back to the year 2001, and in 15,000 municipal-level units of government and many K-12 school districts across the country, you can follow the line-by-line checkbook spending in those units of government. For the first time in history, we basically have every single salary and pension record where available of every public employee at every level. 25 million records every single year we capture in our database. If you're at a public college and university, you want to know what your professor is making, what the dean of your school is making, the president of your school, your football coach, we've got it all. All you have to do is come to our website. It's free to search it. Not only do we open the books, we audit the books, and the audits make national news. I want to share with you in January of 2021 what we saw in our federal employment data. We saw that the number one most highly compensated federal employee was none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci. And immediately we dropped everything. And we wrote this up for my then column at Forbes. And it got 1 million hits on the Forbes column. It was national and international news. Because people wondered, how can the director of a sub-agency of Health and Human Services out-earn everybody? The president, 4-star generals in the United States military, 4.3 million of his federal colleagues. How did Anthony Fauci out-earn all of them? So we filed 4 Freedom of Information Act requests with the National Institutes of Health to get answers, and they were ignored. And we sued them with Judicial Watch as our legal partners. And we won those cases, and they admitted that they were holding 1,200 pages of Fauci financials. That led us to January of 2022. And you remember the Senate hearing, Roger Marshall, and he was aware of our case. And he had Dr. Fauci in the hot seat for 5 minutes, questioning him on his finances. And Marshall, and this ended up being Fauci's code red moment. So when Marshall questioned him for 5 minutes on his finances, Fauci got so flustered that at the end of it, on national television, Fauci called Marshall, the U.S. Senator, a moron. And you can't be America's top doctor if you're melting down on national television. Fauci then disappeared for a couple of months. This was Fauci's code red moment, and when Marshall's quizzing Fauci on his finances, it's all of our work. He's citing our work at Forbes. We had a big stake in that moment. We believe that transparency revolutionizes United States public policy and politics. We do quarterly oversight reports of federal spending. And here's one of the reports that we came out with just last year: the militarization of the federal executive agencies. Here's what we found. Since 2006, rank and file federal agencies outside of the Department of Defense spent $2.7 billion on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. There are more federal officers, 200,000, with arrest and firearm authority than there are United States Marines at 186,000. We found that there are 27 traditional law enforcement agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice. And there are 76 rank-and-file traditional paper-pushing agencies that spent, in the last 5 years, $110 million on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. And recently, our report has rocketed to into the national news cycle. Because you've heard that the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, just got an $80 billion appropriation out of Congress to hire 87,000 new auditors. And you probably saw on Twitter the job posting for the IRS special agent with the qualification that they must be willing to use deadly force. Over the course of the past 5 years, according to our data at openthebooks.com, the IRS has spent since 2006, $21.3 million on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. If you take a look at the IRS gun locker, they have stockpiled 5 million rounds of ammunition. They own 4,600 weapons. And if you break that number down, they actually own 621 shotguns, 539 long-barrel rifles, and even 15 submachine guns. All of this oversight has led to the submission of legislation in Congress, the Disarm the IRS bill that sits in the House right now. We believe that transparency revolutionizes United States public policy and politics. But you gotta fight. And I know of no better example to inspire you here in the room today than that of your president of the foundation, Scott Walker. That actually has a good ring to it, President Scott Walker. You see, he didn't run for governor as his first run for office. He was the county executive in Milwaukee, and he noticed a problem. He wanted to save taxpayers' money. He wanted to hone the budget in the county of Milwaukee. And so he wanted to hire on merit and pay on performance, and the unions wouldn't let him. So he campaigned on it for governor. It was popular with the people. But nobody, once he was elected, thought he would actually execute on it. But they didn't know Scott Walker. He wrote Proposition 10, and when he presented it to the Wisconsin Republican caucus, he said it was like a Braveheart moment. They nearly put him on his shoulders and carried him out of the room. Then he presented it to the Republican caucus in the Wisconsin Senate. And he said it was like he killed their puppy. Soon 10,000 people showed up in the state capitol to battle that simple piece of public policy. But Scott Walker never wavered. He showed political courage. He showed moral courage. And I learned last night at dinner from his wife that he could have done it the easy way. He could have done it by executive order. But he knew in Wisconsin that wouldn't be permanent. So he ran the legislation. They passed the legislation, and it's now been in place for over 10 years, and it has saved the taxpayers of Wisconsin over $10 billion. So take this example from your president back to your university. Take Scott Walker with you. We believe that transparency revolutionizes United States public policy and politics. I want to give you some of the biggest issues of the day where our auditors at openthebooks.com weighed in on. The defund the police movement. Now it's been discredited, but last summer it still had legs in the big cities where the mayors were defunding their police departments. And so we came up with a unique construct. We filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the 25 largest cities. They were all run by Democrats, and we asked for the last 5 years of the mayor's police protection detail, the number of officers, and the costs. And what we found was they're hypocrites. They wanted to defund police for you in the neighborhoods, but they had ramped up their own mayoral police protection. Take, for example, New York City, Bill de Blasio. They stripped $1 billion off $6 billion out of the police budget. But when Bill de Blasio declared for president of the United States, he even took his New York City police detail across the country with him, racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars. In San Francisco, Mayor London Breed, she stripped off $120 million from the police budget, but just in a 5-year period, the taxpayer dollars spent on our own police detail increased by over $1 million. In Chicago, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, she said she was not in favor of defunding the police. But we noticed the headcounts of the police officers between 2019 and 2020, at the height of the pandemic, at the height of the civil unrest in Chicago, had decreased by 400 officers. So the thin blue line was a lot thinner in the city of Chicago during the civil unrest and the looting. And her police detail increased over the course of 5 years by $700,000. We believe that transparency revolutionizes United States public policy and politics. It was 1 year ago. You saw the Taliban advancing on Afghanistan. And our auditors had one question. We wanted to know how much U.S. military gear was going to be left behind. And so we sprung into action, and we were the people, the auditors, that nailed that number. And the number was $82.9 billion over the course of the last 20 years on U.S. taxpayer-provided war gear and training to the Afghan National Security Forces and the Afghan National Army. Let's briefly break that number down. We turned the Taliban into a major U.S. arms dealer for the next decade. 600,000 weapons we provided. That's 350,000 M4s and M16 rifles, 65,000 machine guns, 25,000 grenade launchers, 2,700 mortars and howitzers. We provided 75,000 military vehicles. That's 50,000 light and medium tactical vehicles. That's 22,000 Humvees. Each Humvee, on average, cost the American taxpayer roughly $92,000 apiece. We left behind 1,000 mine-resistant vehicles. Those run between $300,000 and $750,000 apiece. If we ever go back into Afghanistan, we have lost the nighttime advantage. We left behind 16,000 pieces of night vision equipment. Now, the Bible has a phrase that the truth will set you free. The Bible doesn't say that the narrative will set you free. But the Biden administration was running the narrative that this was the most successful extraction of a military force in all of human history. And it wasn't true. We used our hard data and U.S. government audit reports to hold the Biden administration accountable and to tell the American people the truth. Right now, I don't have to tell you that there is a new arms race in America. And the arms race is who is going to use the latest in technology to create transparency of who. We're all in the private sector, and we're completely transparent. All of our finances are online, how much energy we use, our property taxes. If the auditors show up, our books are open. Or are we going to use the latest in technology to hold government accountable and give them review? Reagan, in his farewell address, said that they were successful. The city on the hill was shining again for one simple reason. They empowered the American people. Reagan used the analogy that government is like a car, and the citizens are supposed to be the driver of the car, telling the car how fast to go, when to slow down, when to turn, and when to stop. Reagan said that was the secret of success, re-empowering the American citizen. But what do we have today? Our elected officials, they really, and our unelected bureaucrats, they really think you and I work for them. And that's the power of transparency. So it's no one, because transparency reorders the system. It gives us the data to be able to hold them accountable. So right now, like last week and 1 week ago on Saturday, our full-page editorial published in a paid advertisement at the Wall Street Journal, detailing the government's war on transparency at every level. And it's a bipartisan war. Think about this. The politicians, they always run on transparency. Once they get elected, they run away from it. Right now, the Biden administration is redacting 350,000 names of the executive agency payroll. We calculate and estimate that's $30 billion hidden in the swamp. Back in the last year of the Obama administration, subject to our Freedom of Information Act request, they only redacted 2,300 names. The Federal Reserve, they're probably the most important agency in an inflationary period as we head into recession. They have 23,000 employees. We requested their payroll and their checkbook. On their payroll, they only gave us 367 employees, and on their checkbook, the Federal Reserve said they don't have a checkbook. Office of Vice President. She actually thinks she is immune from disclosing anything. She's claiming that the Office of Vice President is not subject to the Federal Freedom of Information Act law, so you get nothing out of the Office of Vice President. But it's also in red states. For instance, South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem, and she could run for president. She could be a vice presidential candidate. South Dakota, her administration refuses to give us a list. They reject our sunshine request for the state payroll. You see, they instituted an administrative rule. Under the law, the salaries are all transparent. But under the practical application of the administrative rule of state government in South Dakota, you can get one at a time. You have to use the state website. You have to spell the name right. If I'm a state employee in South Dakota, nobody's going to know my salary because you can't spell Andrzejewski. We need to open the books on the state payroll in South Dakota. Before we ran the Wall Street Journal editorial, we reached out to her administration asking her to cure. We went all the way up to the general counsel in South Dakota, and they refused to cure their anti-transparent administrative rule. Republicans in Congress 15 months ago took a secret vote, and 102 Republicans voted to bring back the currency of corruption in Congress. They voted to empower House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. They voted to bring back earmarks. Earmarks are member pet projects that the Speaker doles out to knock heads together to get bipartisan votes on big pork barrel expenditure bills. It is the currency of corruption in Congress. And as soon as Republicans took that secret vote, 23 newly elected Republican congressional freshmen requested from Nancy Pelosi up to $400 million worth of earmarks back in their district. So I'm going to challenge you today. This takes you 10 seconds. Just send out a tweet. Here's some ideas. Join the transparency revolution. Open the books on South Dakota state payroll. Here's the second tweet. Takes 10 seconds. Join the transparency revolution. Open the books on the Office of Vice President, payroll and spending. These are probably 99% issues with the American people. These are easy ones. Ronald Reagan liked to quote Thomas Paine. We have it in our power to begin the world again. And you and I, we have to get comfortable with challenging those people that we elect. They work for us. Aren't you fed up with the big bills coming out of Congress, the omnibus, minibus, huge expenditure bills? Well, last year they were floating the Build Back Better bill. U.S. senators said it was $1.7 trillion. Republicans in the Senate calculated the permanent cost of the bill, and it was $4.7 trillion. And the President, Joe Biden, he said it cost nothing. So this was a bill at openthebooks.com that we read. It was 2,466 pages. And when's the last time you read 10 books? Here's what we found in the bill. $7 billion would create a new climate corps to put the climate cops on your doorstep monitoring your carbon footprint in your own home. Big tax breaks for Joe Biden's political power base, the unions, the media, the trial lawyers, and big tax breaks for his wealthy constituents in states like California, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. We found that he was serious about enforcing his vaccine mandate on private employers with more than 100 employees, because they were going to increase the regulation fines from a maximum of $70,000 to $700,000. Joe Biden was serious that if you didn't comply with his edicts, he was going to bankrupt you. We ran this in a full-page ad at the Wall Street Journal, and here's what the National Review said. The final straw was the education of the ad at the Wall Street Journal that openthebooks.com ran. We helped stop that bill. These big bills lead to all kinds of pork barrel projects and misspending. For example, at the height of the pandemic, they rushed the CARES Act. It was a $2 trillion bill, and they didn't read it. And here's just some of the things in there. So the $1,200 stimulus checks administered by the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. The IRS didn't check with Social Security, who keeps a deceased persons list. The IRS mailed out 2.2 million checks to dead people, costing taxpayers $3.5 billion. Why have a deceased persons list if you don't check the list before you cut the check? Small Business Administration, they ran the Paycheck Protection Program. These were loans that turned into grants. They were supposed to go to mom and pop businesses on Main Street, men and women who had their businesses closed down during the economic lockdown. And the Small Business Administration didn't check with Treasury. Treasury keeps a do not pay list. 57 entities on the do not pay list received a PPP grant. Why keep the lists if you're not going to check the lists before you cut the check? That cost taxpayers another $3.5 billion. You get a lot of other misspending, like Anthony Fauci's National Institutes of Health Allergies and Infectious Diseases grant for $500,000 to turn monkeys transgender. $1 million spent by NASA to prepare the nation's religions for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. And then my favorite grant, coming from Health and Human Services, it was $1.4 million to teach sex education to California prostitutes, who could probably teach the class. And speaking of prostitutes, the Ivy League. The Ivy League got $170 million worth of COVID aid. They've got a collective endowment, the 8 schools, of nearly $200 billion, and they don't need taxpayer help. And they misspend things all the time on grants. For instance, Cornell University, they took a $1 million grant. Where it hurts the most to be stung by a bee. It's the nostril. I read the study. So this is going to take you a minute and a half, 100 seconds. Just go to openthebooks.com. There's a petition tab. We need reform of these big omnibus, minibus, and massive spending bills. We need a 72-hour timeout to simply read the bill. And that's the petition. Please head on over to our website and sign the petition. I don't have to tell you that California has a lot of problems. We've gotten a lot of press over the course of the last couple of years putting Baywatch on Paywatch. This year, we identified that you can be a California lifeguard and make up to $510,000 a year. All of you, you have missed your calling. We found 98 LA County lifeguards made more than $200,000. 20 of them made more than $300,000, all the way up to $510,000. Over the course of the last 6 years, just on overtime alone, one lifeguard made $1 million worth of overtime. Now, many of you that I've met are in the California community college system. The California community college system admits to having 65,000 fake students that are enrolled. Fake students take seats in the classroom from real students and close out classes. Fake students soak up student aid and student tuition that could go to real students. Can't we all agree that students should be real? But the schools are disincentivized to clean up the rolls because if there's been stolen student aid, they have to pay it back. So if you've got examples of fake students in your classroom, please see me afterwards. I want to ask you a question. What government program is running well? I'm going to challenge you to investigate your own public university. If you go to a public university, let's give it oversight. If you're at a private school, let's give oversight to the public university next to yours, or simply give oversight to the federal money coming into your private institution. At openthebooks.com, we can help you with both sides of that. We have their payrolls at public institutions. We have their checkbook spending. We have the federal dollars, the state dollars that come into all of your institutions. So reach out to me. Let's do this together. Let's lock arms. Let's give oversight where we live. How can we complain about Washington, D.C. or our own state capital if we don't have good government in the institutions that we are participating in? Nobody's happy with the level of tuition that we're all paying. My daughter's a freshman at Purdue. It's a ton of money. So let's make sure that the spending is frugal and targeted and helps people, the students that have real needs. The last time I gave oversight to my own local community college, here's what we found. We found that when the president of the school went to Botswana, Africa, and shot an elephant, taxpayers paid for his global positioning satellite phone. We found $200,000 coded in the school's checkbook as instructional supplies was actually the purchase of wine and wine accessories. We found that the school spent millions of dollars building a world-class French restaurant, including a world-class wine cellar. They hired a French sommelier, and then the school executives billed off hundreds of thousands of dollars in eating and drinking at that restaurant. We found that the chief radio station engineer opened up his own company unbeknownst to the accounting staff of the school and billed off up to $500,000 worth of purchasing with his own firm. When we exposed these things, the radio station engineer was actually fired, he was indicted, he pled, he served time, he had to pay back $400,000 in restitution, and he lost his public pension. This is the power of transparency. So let's lock arms, let's get in the same trench, let's fight these battles together. I want to close with the following story. In 2009, I ran for governor of Illinois. It was my first run for office after a successful career as an entrepreneur. I just ran for the top job. I figured, Illinois, we need help, we need reform, we'll take the shot. And I ran strong and aggressively all over the state, and I ran on policy. Every dime online in real time, followed up by a forensic audit. Exactly what I'm talking about here. I decided to swear off politics in 2012 and take this mission writ large across the entire country. But in the closing days of my campaign, on the Friday before the Tuesday election, I had one of the greatest political privileges that I'll ever have in my lifetime. Because one of the greatest champions of freedom and liberty, and a good friend of President Ronald Reagan, flew from Poland into Chicago to endorse my campaign for governor. And his name was Lech Wałęsa. He was the 1982 Nobel Peace Prize winner. He was the first president of Poland in the modern era. And when Wałęsa got there to endorse my campaign at the Union League Club in Chicago, he told the following story. He said, in the early days of the Solidarity movement, nobody gave us a chance to end communism on a peaceful basis. And he said the naysayers were right. When you added up all the bullets, the machine guns, the tanks, the airplanes, the bombs of the communists, we didn't stand a chance. If you took a look at recent history in Poland, if you stood up, you literally got shot down. But Wałęsa said, the naysayers, although they had a point, they missed the most important thing. Wałęsa said that they were successful because of only one reason. They had stronger principles and they had stronger values than the communists. And you and I, we have stronger principles and we have stronger values. When we fight on hard facts, we will win these policy battles. Thank you. Join the transparency revolution. Join us at openthebooks.com. And I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
All right, folks, if you have a question for Adam, please raise your hand and remember to state your name and where you go to school.
Hi. There we go. My name is Marlon. I go to Santa Fe College in Gainesville, Florida. Our city is actually ran by a lot of liberals, and Florida, cities are mandated to to release their audits every year. And our city hasn't released their audits in about 10 years' time.
Wow.
Yeah. So my question to you is, when you have murky money like that, how do you go about shifting through and finding out where the money goes?
Excellent question. First off, let's dig in, okay? So we have constitutional right to transparency. I described it. It's Article 1, Section 9, where transparency is in our founding documents, right? So in the state of Florida, you actually have a very good sunshine law. So we need to file a request for all financial information at this institution. So So here are some of the requests that you're going to file. Number one, for their payroll, all in, all bonuses, total compensation, costs of benefits, everything. Number two, their line-by-line vendor checkbook spending, including their fund accounts. Number three, all electronic credit card, P-card, electronic purchasing at that school. With those three requests, you'll have many questions. Oftentimes, they won't answer your question. You'll have to take your question into a public board meeting. You'll have to network up to 50 to 500 of your friends and family and colleagues into those meetings. That becomes a media event. That process in the state of Illinois over the course of the last 8 years has led to the resignation of over 500 elected and public officials who have fled in the face of that watchdog model. That's the model. It's the best watchdog model in the entire country. And the political class, Republicans and Democrats, they don't know what to do with that. They know how to beat you in an election. But when you hold their spending decisions up against statutes and the law, we find they cannot defend their expenditures, and they flee in the face of that transparency.
Hi, my name is Matt Walker, and I attend Liberty University. So you were recently talking about the IRS, and when you were following the money, basically saw that they had shotguns and ammunition, all these things. When I think of the IRS, I think of just a table, desk with a computer in front and working on paperwork. Why do you think they have these weapons and such?
Okay, so specific to the IRS, I mean, the IRS does have a long history of law enforcement. So, I always reach out for comment to the agencies before we publish. And just to put this in perspective, our honorary chairman at openthebooks.com was the legendary U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, Dr. Tom Coburn. And so we kicked off this militarization oversight of the federal rank and file agencies all the way back in 2016 on the editorial page in a premium placement with Coburn and I authoring the piece of Why Does the IRS Need Guns? And so when you reach out to the IRS, here's the answer that you get from the spokesperson, that they have a long history of law enforcement. As a matter of fact, it was Treasury agents that busted Al Capone back in the day, right? They go after narcotics traffickers and very bad and dangerous adversaries, and so they need weapons, okay? That's their answer. Okay, fast forward to today, and people don't understand why the tax collection agency is literally armed to the teeth. And I think as you see public policy playing out across the country, people are rightfully scared. They've got $80 billion, they're adding 87,000 auditors to the ranks, and they're recruiting more special agents with badge, arrest, and firearm authority, and asking those folks in a primary qualification that they're willing to use deadly force. So it may come a time, and that's this Disarm the IRS congressional bill, that the police powers are transferred from the IRS into traditional law enforcement federal agencies, so there is some separation. For instance, maybe it goes to the U.S. Marshals.
All right, we have time for one final question.
I'm Patrick Wilkinson. I go to the University at Buffalo. You were talking about the agents for the IRS, and there's a lot of information, not financial information, about the fact that NASA, Department of Education, they all have armed agents, which is extremely weird. I don't know what NASA is doing. Maybe they didn't encounter extraterrestrials and they haven't told us yet. Maybe that's why. But how do we
machine guns over there?
How do we make people care about this? Because some of this information's already existed, and people just don't seem to care. How do we do that?
Well, it is an excellent question, and I'm going to answer that on a number of different levels. Okay, so as I said, Coburn and I, and Coburn passed about 2 years ago, God rest his soul, and he was the one that posited this frame with 200,000. We were able to tie out 200,000 federal agents with arrest and firearm authority versus the number of United States Marines at 186,000. That was Coburn's frame. He knew this because of his service, obviously, in the United States Senate. So how do you get people to care? So in 2016, when we put this up at the Wall Street Journal, it immediately led to a congressional hearing. Nobody remembers the congressional hearing because the very next day, the Hillary email scandal broke. But in the congressional hearing, Republicans were in charge of the House. Jason Chaffetz was the chairman of Homeland Security, and it was an extraordinary hearing. I mean, the federal agencies have Uzis, and they've lost them and don't know where they're at. And it was example after example after example with the lack of guns, ammunition, and gun locker controls and accounting in the federal agencies. Okay, that was on the Obama administration. And conservatives were rightfully scared because at the time you had Lois Lerner at the IRS and she was targeting conservative organizations and slowing down their paperwork and things like that ahead of the 2016 election. Then Donald Trump came into office. We were consistent. We did an audit published in 2019 that Donald Trump continued the practice of arming the federal agencies. And guess what? Nobody on the right cared. Nobody on the left cared because I think they're in favor of it. Nobody on the right cared when it was Trump. And we were actually attacked by Trump supporters for giving this oversight. Now it's the Biden administration. And I'm thankful for the coverage. Prime time, Hannity. Prime time, Tucker Carlson. Legislation from Republicans in Congress to disarm the IRS. I am tired on the public policy issues of the day, good public policy, and the politicians and their supporters playing politics.